SparkMES, an MES accelerator for ignition.
Awesome. Thanks, Dwayne. And hey, everybody. Like Dwayne said, today we're going to be doing an overview of the OEE package of Spark. If you caught us last time on where we were giving a brief overview of everything, then you would have seen us briefly touch on what the OEE package does as well as some of the other stuff. But here we're going to try to do a little bit more of a deep dive into that. So with that, let's get into that. So before we get into actually showing the screens, I do want to just give a brief primer on what OEE is really doing and why this may be a package that you want to consider. Maybe you already know that. Maybe you don't at this point. So first, if I can get it to let me go to the next slide. There we go. First, just a brief primer on what OEE is. So OEE stands for Overall Equipment Effectiveness. And essentially what it is like, hey, what percentage or how effective am I at producing whatever we're producing, right? There's three different components that go into OEE. There is availability, performance, and then quality, which sometimes you'll hear called yield. Really just depends on where you're looking at. And each of these components, I would argue, is really maybe even more important than the overall OEE number itself. So just talking through these a little bit here, the availability number, what this is really telling us is, are we running, or what percentage of the time that we should be running, are we actually running? And the way this actually gets calculated is it takes your machine's uptime. How often are you actually is the machine actually producing parts or able to produce parts? Versus divided by the amount of time that's planned to be up. So note when we say planned time, that does exclude like scheduled time. So obviously, like if you don't work the weekends, then you don't want that counting against your availability stat. Next is performance. So performance takes that to the next step and says, okay, while we are running as well as we could, right? Are we producing materials at the rate that we are rated to produce them at? And so this is going to be taking your ideal cycle time. So theoretically, how fast could you be producing materials and multiplying that by how many parts you actually produce divided by runtime. And it'll give you a ratio of, if we were supposed to produce X and we actually produce Y, you can take those divided by each other. That's the performance. So next is the quality or the yield, like I said. So this one takes that and says, okay, of how many parts that we've produced, how many of them were good, or what percentage of them were good. And so the calculation for this would be your good parts produced divided by your total amount of parts that you produced. So as you can see, each of these metrics has a different focus and a different value that it can provide. And maybe all three of these can prove value for you, or maybe just one of these can, right? But all of them can be something you're getting out of an OE solution. So now you can ask yourself, why OEE, right? Why would I want to do the OEE package? What are the questions that maybe I'm asking that would trigger me to look at doing an application like this? So some common questions on here that we hear all the time from customers is, how can I produce more parts, right? Or maybe if you look at the bottom one there, right? Do I have the availability with my current production to be able to meet my production goals, right? So if I want to ramp up production, are there efficiencies I can do internally with my current setup to meet those new goals? Or do I need to look at adding new lines, adding new equipment, adding more people, something like that? This really gives you that sort of view into that. Why is a certain machine down so often? We know it's down. Why is it down? Getting those sort of analytics. What parts of the process are keeping me from being able to run at a designated rate? So you have a line, you're not producing materials as fast as you are. Where's my bottleneck, right? This kind of stuff will give you insight into that sort of thing. How can you reduce waste? So with stuff like scrap codes, you can say, hey, not only can you say this is how much scrap we have, but where that scrap is coming from and why that scrap is getting made, giving you views into that. And lastly, just kind of giving you the time series view of like, why is maybe one shift outperforming another? Why is my OEE go down 1 week to the next week? Why is one season worse than another? It's really giving you insights into that. So if any of these questions, and there's probably a lot more questions around it than just this, but if any of these questions are things that you're asking yourself, then this is a type of application that could be for you. And so we're going to go through the OEE package, which covers a lot of these. And so with this, I'm going to go ahead and end this slideshow and get into the actual demo here. So does everybody's, now we're showing the main OEE dashboard here. So like we talked about last time, everything with SparkMES is 100% configurable, right? It's everything everything we're showing here is the out of the box day one value you're getting. But then it's all open and able for you to update. So you could, if you wanted this dashboard to change in any way, maybe you want to have your cards look a little bit different, or you want to have your navigation structure look a little different at the top. All of that is you're able to do that, right? Because it's all just native perspective screens that we're looking at. But walking through this main overview screen here and some of the out-of-the-box functionality you get day one, um, I'm looking at an overall enterprise here. So this could be a site, maybe you're using this for a single plant, maybe you're using this for a single line, maybe you're using it for a single machine. It can scale to any one of those levels. But in this demo, I'm showing an example of maybe an enterprise where I'm trying to show 5 different plants and the OEE metrics of those different plants. So at the top, I can see that I'm currently looking at my enterprise and I can see my 5 plants here. In the top lower left corner here, I can see the overall availability of my enterprise as a whole. So we're not only showing you machine OEE statistics, but we're also showing you line, facility, area, whatever statistics, right? So you can have analytics at whatever level you need. So I'm showing the enterprise here. I can see the statistics for it. I can see not only the OEE, but also the availability, quality, and performance, and also the individual numbers that lead into this overall calculation. So you can see what's really driving your numbers, maybe where you're getting hit hardest or that kind of thing. Next, on the right side, I can see the OEE statistics and a little bit of information about how each of my sublocations, which in this case are my plants, are running. So I can see their overall OEE statistics, how many good, bad, and total parts they've produced, total time they've spent down, and also their current status. So this little running man icon shows that it's currently running right now. And lastly, down here in the bottom left, we're showing here, this is just an example of maybe a deeper analytic that you'd want to see. But this is showing that for my enterprise as a whole, looking at my plants, what are my top downtime codes? And not only what are my top downtime codes for this enterprise, but which locations are like driving to those downtime codes the most? Since this is simulated data, they're all pretty close to each other and how much they're affecting each one. But by looking at this, I can see that, hey, I've been getting a good amount of e-stop, a total of 1.4 hours of e-stop events that have happened inside of my enterprise, and I can see how those are split amongst my different plants. Now, this is all great. I can see at a high level all of this stuff, but then you're going to be asking yourself, okay, well, plant 1 is at 43% OE. That's cool. Um, I want to see a little bit more about that. So if I wanted to see that, I could just click on plant 1 here. And then that's just going to change this dashboard to then drill in and show the plant 1 OEE statistics. Right, so it's all the same stuff. You see plant 1's OEE and it's drilled down over here. But also you can see the statistics of the sublines, right? So we're following the same process and just drilling through repeatedly all of the different facility and the different infrastructure that we have set up for our enterprise or our plant or whatever. One thing I didn't cover about this dashboard though, this is meant to be a real-time dashboard. This dashboard is currently showing, I have it set to be the last 2 hours of time, but you can change this to be whatever order you want it to be, whatever time range you want it to be, whether you want it to be 24 hours, 8 hours, minutes, you can do that. You can do by shift, you could do by order. All of this stuff is we can do. We store all of our OEE data in a time series fashion, so it gives us a lot of flexibility to be able to slice and dice data however we want to. Great. So we've seen our our higher level, plant level, line level, etc. OEE statistics. Now let's keep drilling in, and maybe we can see a little bit more information once we get to the machine level. let's check out our
Hey,
machine.
Eric,
Oh, yep.
a question came in. Are the statistics that drive the OEE configurable?
hmm Yeah, so there's a couple different parts to that question, I would say. So first, the individual, if you're saying like the individual calculation, so if you remember my PowerPoint slide where I said, here's how availability is calculated, here's how performance is calculated, here's how quality is calculated. Those are the industry standard ways of calculating OEE and its components, but that doesn't mean that they're the formulas that are going to drive value or for you or maybe match your standards. If those formulas need to change, then yeah, we can certainly change those. All of this is calculated by a single stored procedure. So we would just be updating that, the function used in there to change how it gives you the actual values out of the system. So that is not a problem to change. More often than not, and maybe this is the way that your question is leaning, is you want to change the formula by changing what statuses count as running versus down, what counts as scrap versus not scrap, that kind of thing. In those cases, we do have a full configuration application that I'll talk about a little bit more here in a second, where you can set up all of that stuff, right? All of that level of configuration. So,
Yeah, Ron said that you nailed the question or
okay,
answered his
cool,
question. Thanks.
good, good, thanks, perfect. Actually, to that point too, one thing I wanted to mention that I should have mentioned at the beginning, but I just didn't. Uh, how are we getting this data? So this data, all of the OEE data, so when you're looking at OEE data, there's really only a couple data points that really go into it. OEE is a very popular starting system for SparkMES. It's definitely the biggest package that we see people buy first because of the simplicity of data that's required for it versus the value that you get out of it. Um, Really, for data points, you're looking at needing like in-feed, out-feed scrap counts, status codes for your equipment, um, maybe run rates and part numbers that are currently running. But at most, you're looking at probably 7 or 8 data points for this. So, however, getting those data points can sometimes be a little bit challenging, depending on your processes. For example, especially when it comes to like status, sometimes your equipment knows its status very well. Sometimes you can have a machine that can provide you, say, hey, I'm running. Hey, I'm down because the e-stop was pressed. Hey, I'm down because a light screen was tripped or whatever it is. That's great. That's the ideal. But more often than not, the where you're going to fall into is you're going to have maybe a little bit of that, but you're going to rely some on the operators to give you that sort of information, right? So when we're looking at this data entry, all of the data entry comes in on the machine level, right? So you receive data for the machine level, whether it be from a machine or from an operator interface, which I'll show an example of an operator interface here in a little bit. And taking that data, right, we can then store that all at the machine level, and then Spark, the OEE package of Spark, will take care of them propagating that up to the line, area, facility, enterprise, whatever, right? It'll automatically handle that for you in those calculations based on your configuration, which again, I'll show the configuration here in a little bit as well. So all of that data you're seeing up here, you're not having to give us a line out feed, right? We calculate it based on your machine data. So um, back to this, I guess. When we're at the machine level here, right now that we're at the machine level, we don't have any children. We are going to show a couple more charts that are all just show some deeper analytics of this machine's OEE data. So a couple things on here at the top, you can see over this time range, how often were we running versus down. So anything that's red here is going to be when we were down. If you hover over it, you can see um, what part number was running. You can see the start and end time of this event and all of that fun stuff. And really, this is just letting you see kind of, hey, is there big clumps of red that are telling me that was down a lot in a short period of time? Over here, you can see your OEE statistics, your OEE availability, performance, and quality. Um, you can just see those statistics here for this machine. And then down below, this takes another step further, where you can see the actual parts that we produced for this machine. So this machine has produced 75 parts. And we can see the target parts of how many that it should have produced based on our target run rates and things like that. And then we can also see how many parts have been scrapped from the system. So just giving you a couple more like hard numbers of like, how are you doing? How are we doing towards actually producing everything? And this little trend here is showing the thin blue bar is saying this is where we should be, and the thicker bar is where we actually are. So you can kind of see that we're a little bit behind. So another chart here in the middle, and this kind of shows, I think, some of the power of how OEE data is stored. We don't do, in SparkMES, we don't do pre-aggregations of things. We store a lot of our data as raw data, which lets us have a lot of we can slice the dice of data however we want to. And so what this chart is actually doing is this is trending over the last 7 days. It's calculating for every hour what were all of each of my OEE statistics. And so you can kind of see that over time, how is my OEE trending? And this is nice because you can look for valleys and peaks. We talked about the one benefit of, hey, maybe I want to know why 1 week is worse than another, or if one shift is doing better than another, or whatever you may want to know. This kind of gives you that insight because you can really see how your OEE availability, performance, and quality are all changing over time as you're going. Lastly on here, there's this thing down here, but it's just showing OEE in a different way, a little bit different graphical way here. The downtime overview, this is, I think, the simplest thing on the screen probably, but it's also when most people want an OEE application, this is what they're wanting. this is a lot of the value they're really wanting out of it is, hey, for machine 1, what's my biggest downtime causes? What's is causing me the most downtime? And what are the heaviest hitters that I can go and fix to really get the most bang for my buck for driving faster? So getting more parts produced. So this is showing all my 4 downtime codes. You can see by the total downtime caused, I can see how many minutes each event was how many minutes of downtime was caused by each event as a Pareto chart here. Or I can also see the total by the total number of occurrences, right? So you can see that my unknown events, I've had a lot of occurrences of those, but they don't account for a lot of downtime. This is actually a lot, very, very little downtime. But when I look at my overall, like how much time it's caused, unknown almost does nothing, right? So each one can drive its own value depending on what you're trying to look at. Cool. So that is some of the main OE dashboards. These are just some examples of OE dashboards. One thing I want to call out on here too, when we're talking about SparkMES as a framework for building out your solution, every component you're seeing on here is a separate view inside of Perspective. So for those of you that have used Perspective and Ignition, then these are all just different views you can embed, and you just give us what machine or location you're wanting to look at, a start and end timestamp, and then it works. So you can take these then and actually build these out to build some of your own dashboards, right? Maybe you want to build reports. These can be used on reports, that kind of thing. It's a starter kit for letting us be able to build these sort of applications more quickly. So. All right, so these have been some examples of some line overview screens. Maybe these are screens that are showing on like a TV over your line. Maybe there's something an engineer's using to drill down and see how my plant's doing, or plant manager's using to see how my plant's doing. Let's show something maybe more akin to what an operator may be caring about. So I'm going to hit this. And so now this is an example of maybe what an operator screen may look like. So this is showing for machine 1. So I'm an operator. I'm sitting at machine 1. I can see what location I'm currently at, what order I'm running, what item number I'm producing, or what part number I'm producing. I can see what my current status is and things like that. My available OEE stats, right? A lot of these are the same widgets we've seen, right? But again, it's more focused on how am I doing, right? How is my machine doing? Because they probably don't care how the other machines are doing. And also over here, we have a more detailed breakdown. And this is honestly a chart that I see a lot of people end up repurposing for reports because there's a lot of really cool data in here of, hey, for this machine, what are all my statuses? What are the orders that we're running at those times during these downtime codes? And how many parts during each of these events should I have expected to produce? And how many did I actually produce? And how much scrap did I produce? Right? So it's kind of giving you like this is something that you'd probably export out to maybe a CSV or Excel, so you can do some further analytics if you wanted to, or it just shows you a lot of like the raw data of what's actually going on here. So this operator screen changes all the time. This is just a selection of some of the widgets that we have for building an operator dashboard. To give you an idea, this operator dashboard is pretty simple because this dashboard is built with the assumption that this machine is giving us automatically in-feed, out-feed scrap counts. It's automatically giving us the part number that's running. And it is giving us automatically statuses, at least some statuses, right? However, this dashboard does assume that we may be getting some statuses from the machine, and this is where I think the most common way we see statuses are, where a machine can give us some statuses. It can say, I'm on, I'm off, maybe like the e-stop's pressed, which is great, cool. If we can get even that much, that's hugely valuable, right? But we need still some human manual clarification on top of those those machine downtimes, right? To tell us more details, right? Because just saying the machine's down isn't really helpful. That's not going to drive any change. So what we want to do in some of those cases is the machine says I'm down, great. That gives us a start and end timestamp to go from, so we don't have to rely on operators to tell us exactly the time it started and ended. But we can use the start and end time of those events, but we can then ask the operator, prompt the operator to tell us what's going on. So in the system, I'll show in the configuration app in a little bit, you can configure events in the system or codes coming from your equipment that require more operator feedback, right? And when you get those sort of events, what's going to happen is you would get a doc that pops up, and we would ask the operator to say, hey, what's going on? What's happening here? I'm probably not going to get one of those events happen here, but because I don't watch the screen all the time, I have this little indicator that shows me all of these different events that I have going on here. So I have all these unknown events that have happened that are just sitting here waiting for the operator to give me more information on. So then as the operator, whoever, I can just go in here and click on one. This is the doc that would come up if if the event happened real time. And then from here, I can just say, oh yeah, what actually happened was that it was the light screen got tripped, right? Or maybe it's actually running. I don't know. You can give it whatever details you want here, and then they can also enter some comments, just some color commentary. We do require a category just because that lets us do better reporting, but the comments are nice to give more details about what actually happened, that you can analyze that separately. These buttons are dynamic. Everything here, the buttons, the tabs, everything is dynamically populated based on the configuration you're doing in your production model configuration, which again, I'll show right after we're done on the screen. So I go here, I say light screen tripped. I say that, I don't know, it got tripped, whatever. I don't know, I don't have to enter anything. And then I just hit apply. And then that would change that event that would add like clarification to that event in history. And depending on what button they chose, it can even change how that event affects your availability, right, and your performance. So for example, maybe they said, oh, we weren't actually down, we went to lunch, right? Then maybe you want to count that as planned downtime instead of having it negatively affect your availability. So that's just one example of how we can do this. I mean, other widgets we have built that we have in our library here are stuff to let people operators enter in-feed, out-feed scrap counts, change orders that are going from the UI, all of that kind of stuff, enter scrap codes. We have all these types of components built into the system, just not on this example dashboard here. So, all right. So that's really all I wanted to show. Again, 2 example dashboards that are just examples of what we can do with the framework. Again, everything here is just widgets that we can use to build out more complex dashboards that fit your process. But with that, I then want to hop over to the configuration app to show how do things change, right? What does it look like to set all of this up? So let's do that. So I'm going to leave. Currently, we're in our OEE workstation. I'm going to hop over to our configuration workstation. Setting up our configuration workstation is the hub of configuration for every package in SparkMES. And really, there's a lot of different options for what you can configure. But OEE is fairly simple configuration options-wise, with just 2 different configuration screens for it. The first of these screens is or the first one I'll cover, I guess, is the shift management. A big part of OEE is knowing what does your shift schedule look like? When are you expected to be running? You know, we talked about like scheduled downtime versus unscheduled downtime, right? Well, to do scheduled downtime, we need to know when it is scheduled to be down. So I chose 8. I'm going to choose, so here we can make some shifts. We can do, so I can choose my shift schedule here. So I have my 8-hour schedule here. You can have lots of different schedules if you want them. For each schedule, when I choose one, I can then see what my specific shifts are. So I can see that I have a 7, this first shift is going to be from 7 to 15. Second shift is 15 to 23, or 20, I guess that'd be what, 11 p.m., right? And then this one's 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And I can see that these shifts are all applicable for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So this is a 24/7 shift schedule. Additionally, inside of these shifts, maybe you have scheduled breaks, right? Maybe I always take lunch at noon for 30 minutes during first shift. So if I click on first shift, then I can down here configure what breaks I have in the system and when those are going to happen. And again, these would just factor in as planned downtime. So anytime that's not in a shift, planned down, scheduled downtime. Anything that's a break in a shift is scheduled downtime as well. So once you have your schedules made, then we can do some production model configuration. So we can take those and lay out what does our facility look like. So I'm going to show you the actual plant model that we used for populating this OEE dashboard, and this should look pretty familiar. This tree is, the way this tree works is I choose the parent location, which was our enterprise. So let me hop back out here. So we got our enterprise here, and our enterprise has 5 children of the plant. So I can see here that under enterprise, I can see my 5 plants here, just as quick selections. And I can say, oh, I'm wanting to look at plant 1's production model. And if you remember, when we drilled into plant 1, we had 2 lines, and when we drilled into line 1, we had 3 machines. So all of this is our production model here. So this is defining what actually shows up on the screen. When you're looking at the production model, I can just click through the different locations here. On the right, you can see the location type. This location type is important because it dictates how data flows up the tree. So, you know, we have a machine, and the machine flows up, and this one goes to line 1, and line 1 is an OE group. What OE group means is it tells us that, hey, my children, line 1's children, machine 1, 2, 3, execute in sequence to each other. So they're a set line. And so that obviously means that line 1's outfeed should be like machine 3, and its infeed is machine 2. So that kind of thing is important when we're figuring out how we propagate up values. Another scenario, though, is like this plant, where plant 1 is a parallel operations. And the parallel operations says, hey, my children execute in parallel to one another. So when we're looking at the outfeed of a plant, then that is going to be the sum of the outfeeds of its 2 children, right? Because they're both producing independently of one another. So using these location types, you can really build out your production model to really lay out how the data propagates up and have a lot of control over that to make sure we're propagating things correctly. So I go in here, I add all my machines and stuff, and then I go to the machine level, and then we have to configure the OEE statistics for it, or how we're calculating OEE. So I'll just look at machine 1. So for machine 1, I can see what my calculation method is that I want to use. So when you're calculating yield, you have to choose, you know, I said there's infeed, outfeed, scrap. Well, really only 2 of those get used to calculate yield. So you tell us which 2 of them you want to use. In most cases, these are going to be the 2 that you're actually going to provide the system. So maybe your machine doesn't have infeed counts, then you'd want to use outfeed, scrap counts, however that may work. You can set up your OE targets. So what are my targets here that I want to actually strive for? And you can also show the choose over here the instance of the OEE UDT, which I'll show in a second. That's going to be representing this location. So when we're configuring a location here on the ignition tag layer, there's also a UDT that you would plug in that would provide us with the OEE values and take care of all the calculations and all that fun stuff. So we'll talk about the UDT here in just a second. Next, maybe a little more fun, is the machine events, right? So this is saying, we're assuming most of the time when machines are giving status codes out, they're giving status codes out with a number, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? But if I just showed 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to somebody, right, in a report, they'd be like, okay, that's great. What does it mean? How does it affect OEE? That kind of thing. This table is where you can configure that. So this is saying for machine 1, I have the machine can give me 5 different states, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And if I get a 0, then 0 is going to be running. So the name of that event is going to be running. The name is just purely flavor text. It's just description of what's actually happening. The group is just a way of grouping similar events together. This is just going to fall into a running group. And if you remember from I'll talk about that in a little bit, I guess. The state is going to be the number from the PLC that we're going to get, or the value from the PLC that we're going to get that triggers this event. The most important thing on here, I'd say, besides maybe the name, is the class, right? So this class is a set list. And this class tells us, hey, how does this event affect my availability, right? And this is where when I think it was Ron asked a question earlier about who can we configure how an event maybe affects OEE, right? Can we configure that sort of thing? This is where you do that. You have control over what your states do and how they factor into your OEE calculations. If you set your state to be running, then it's going to be positive for your availability. If it's planned downtime, then it's going to be ignored. Planned downtime is the same as scheduled downtime, or it's calculated the same as scheduled time. It's going to be ignored. This is where you may use for like breaks, lunches, scheduled maintenance, that kind of stuff. And then any of these other ones would count negatively towards your availability. These are states you don't want to hit. So you have that kind of control here to update those as you're going through the system. You can set severities on these states too. Maybe you want to change how you report based on the state that is going on, right? So if this state maybe is a fatal, maybe we want to, or an error, maybe we want to email people for it. Maybe if it's warning, we don't really care. Maybe you'll want to do some filtering later on these. This is just more metadata we can use for those kind of driving things. And lastly, you remember I talked about how you can configure an event such that when we see that event or that status from the machine, that we then ask the operator, we prompt the operator to give us more information. Well, that's what this last configuration is, require input. Require input, if this gets checked, says that, hey, if I get this event, I need more information about what's going on. And that's what prompts that. So you can configure as many of these machine events as you want. If you have stuff like microstoppages, you can say that don't have a state. And then these are going to be manually entered states only. And they can enter that sort of stuff. All right, last tab on here, last piece of configuration here is the just general configuration stuff. So this is where you assign a schedule to a machine. So you say, okay, well, machine 1 is going to execute on this schedule, machine 2 is going to execute on this schedule. So this lets you do things like maybe each area, different areas in your plant have different schedules that they operate at. Maybe different equipment has different schedules they operate at. This is where you can really define that sort of stuff. So we can set that up. You can say what sequence number this is in the parent. So this is how we decide what the first child is and last child is and that kind of stuff. You can configure microstoppages. Microstoppages is the concept of like essentially debouncing in OEE where, if you have a state that shows up for, maybe if you have a state that shows up for 2 seconds, maybe you don't care, right? I don't care that it showed up. I want to just classify it as something else and move on with my life, right? That's what microstoppages will let you do. I'm basically saying here you can either turn it off or on. And I could say here that, hey, this is if a microstoppage, if I get an event that's less than 10 seconds, then I want to reclassify it as one of my machine events from over here, right? So here I'm saying I want to reclassify it as a microstoppage event. The nice part about this is you can then choose how you want microstoppages to affect your availability. So, yeah, and not going to talk about those other options probably. So this is just some like basic configuration of how you would actually configure your OEE system inside of Spark MES. So with that, I think what I want to do now, unless we have any questions that we need to hop to.
Yeah, we did have a couple of questions come in.
Okay, let's do
Um,
that, and then I can do some other stuff if we have time at the end.
okay.
Hmm.
So one of them is, how does your system handle running through a scheduled break?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So if you run through a scheduled break in the system, we will still count that time as scheduled downtime. So it will not factor into your availability. However, I believe with the out of the box stuff, if you produce any parts during that, it would still count towards your like your quality and performance metrics, right? So you're essentially running when you shouldn't have. We still keep those events, right? So we still keep those scheduled statuses, so we could tell you the status the machine was at any point in there. So then later on, if you decide you want to go move that scheduled break, like maybe you move the break 15 minutes later, and that's why it's running over, um, then if you did move that, then those events would start being accounted for. So, and again, that's the out of the box way of handling it. If we need to change it, we can. But,
The same person asks, or states, first of all, that this person's OEE targets change each year.
mm-hmm.
Does this keep track of historical targets?
Currently, it actually does not. So that would be something that we would have to do custom, right? Add for you. But no, right now we just store it as a current metric for it.
Okay, that's it.
Cool. Okay. Okay, I think the last thing I want to do here, since we have some time here, is I want to talk a little bit about the OEE UDT, what's going to be giving us this data, and then walk through how it works to set up a new piece of equipment. So I have my setup. I'm moving and grooving with my current enterprise. Now I want to add a new machine. Maybe I want to add a fourth machine or another machine to line one here. Okay, let's do that. So to do that, first I can update my production model here. So I'm going to go to line one. I'm going to click on the parent. So I'm going to say I want to add a child of line one, and I'm going to say add location. So I can give this new child location a name. So I'm going to call this machine 4, if I can type machine 4. And then I have to choose the location type for it. So I want this, so I know that this machine is going to be a machine that's going to be providing me OEE values. So it's going to be giving me the infeed outfeed scrap statuses, all that fun stuff. So in those cases, what I actually want to choose is I want to choose OEE machine. OEE machine is a location that's going to be providing us values. And so then from here, I can say, okay, machine 4, OEE machine, and I can say commit. And then that will add another machine under here. So now I have a fourth machine on here. Well, now we have to configure this machine. So I'm going to click on it. I'm going to choose I want to use outfeed scrap. I'm not going to set any targets. I'm not really too worried about it. I'm not going to choose a UDT for now. You don't actually have to choose a UDT. This can just be used for some real-time displays if you're using it. So I'm not going to worry about it right now. So I'm just going to choose outfeed scrap here and commit that. Then I need to go configure my machine events. I could spend some time configuring a good amount of machine events, but maybe I know that my machine events are going to be the same as machine 3's, right? Because machine 3 and machine 4 are the same. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to I'm going to export my machine events from over here. So that download this event data CSV1. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to hit upload, browse, and I'm going to choose that CSV, and then there we go. Now I got my machine events going. So then I didn't have to configure them all. I could have just configured these all from scratch, but I don't want to spend the time doing that. And lastly, if I go to the OE General tab, I need to assign a schedule to this. So I'm going to say this is the 8-hour schedule. I'm not going to worry about micro stoppages. I'm going to say my default event. So default event is, hey, if we get a status we don't recognize, what should we classify that as? And I'm going to choose unknown. So then if we get an event we don't recognize, it'll prompt the user to say what's going on. So and that should be all I have to configure here. So I'm going to hit commit, and that should be everything. Great. Now we've got a new machine set up in the system. But we don't have any data piped to it now. Like if you were doing just a manual process, then this is all you'd have to do and it would be working. But in my case, the way I have this set up right now, the dashboard set up, I'm assuming that I'm going to be getting a bunch of information from the PLC. So I need to go set up the PLC side of things. So let's do that. Let me drag this over here. So I'm going to hop into my simulation here. So what I have going on in here, I have some simulators. I just have 3 of them I've just been reusing. You would have some real machine tags in your guys' case. But these can be set up however you want, right? This is just an example of maybe some different machine tags you're going to have. I got in here, I got some counters that are counting up and feed out feed scrap counts going up here. I've got some status codes that are coming in that are being calculated from some different status bits and everything. So I've got some different machine data here. Just using standard ignition practices to get this data in. And now I want to start logging OEE on this piece of equipment. So to do that, what I would do is I would go in, I'm going to follow my tag structure practice that I've been using, but you could put this wherever you want to. I'm going to go into plant 1, line 1, and I'm going to just make a machine 4. So let's make a new folder here. New folder, machine 4. Great. There we go. Again, this is just my practice. If I like to make my tag layer the same as or similar to my production model. So I got my machine 4 here. Now I just have to add my OEE UDT inside of it. The OEE UDT is something that comes with it. It comes with this OEE package, and this is really what takes care of getting all the data from the equipment and getting it into the system in the right format. So let's add that UDT. So I'm gonna go and add it. I'm gonna say new tag, data type instance, OEE, counter OEE UDT. And it's thinking, there we go, cool. All right, so this will let me configure a new instance of the OEE UDT for this location. So you can see there's just a bunch of tags in here too that let us configure like how do we handle in-feed counts, how do we handle out-feed counts and scrap counts and all that fun stuff, states and things like that. All of that, this UDT has all that stuff built into it. But I can just say that I want this UDT to be called OEE. And then if I look at the parameters for this, the way that the OEE UDT works is that I can just configure the tag paths that I want to reference. So if you remember, I have these machine tags down here that I want to reference, this UDT to reference for pulling in in-feed, out-feed scrap counts. I just put the tag paths of those tags in here. So I can say I want my in-feed tag to be, copy that path here. This is my in-feed path. This is my out-feed path. There's my scrap path. And lastly, I'll do status. I'm not going to worry about the other ones for now. Well, actually, I think I do want to do, I'll do part number, part info, part code. Great, so I just pipe in those paths there. This just functions off a reference tag. So again, the nice part about this is that in no way do we want any part of SparkMES to dictate how you build your ignition system. And so in this way, we can kind of stay outside of, you can set up the tag layer however you want to inside of your system, and you can just tie it into this OEE UDT. And lastly on here, the most important one here is the location ID that this UDT is representing. So if I go back to my configuration workstation and I'm on machine 4, you can see the ID right here for this location. This is a unique identifier for it that the system uses. And I can just go in here and punch that in here. Great. Now I've set up my UDT, I can hit OK. And assuming I did everything right, which is sometimes an if. Then if I go in here and I look at outfeed, I can see my outfeed count there and the raw value there. I can see my scrap count going on. I can see my part codes. Yeah, this is all looking really good. So I can see all my information going in here and it's all been piped in here. So, and you can see here too, I can see what my classification is based on the state, based on my configuration for the machine events for this location. So all really cool. So now that I've done that, configured the production model, configured the schedule, configured the UDT, now if I go back to my OEE UDT, my OEE dashboard, and I go plant 1, line 1, now you'll see I have a machine 4 here. And if I open up machine 4, then I'll see some different information about it. Yeah, it's not going to like the fact that it doesn't have much data, but you can see some different statistics. Obviously, as this runs a little bit more, it's going to normalize the data, but you can see I'm already getting things like production counts. I'm getting things like statuses and all of that fun stuff going on. So at this point, I've now configured a new location in the system. So not a whole lot of steps to go through for it to get that going. And also that would automatically start propagating the statuses up and counts up and all that fun stuff and automatically get factored in. So, let's see. Last thing I'll say here too, we also have a screen in here for managing all of this stuff. So we all know that hopefully, all the data you're getting is good data, but we all know that sometimes things get entered incorrectly and need to update and change and whatnot. So for that, we have an admin screen here that lets you actually modify any of these values that we're getting in the system. So if you want to add a new outfeed count or edit an outfeed count, you can through the system, like change this an outfeed count that you received. If you want to change an infeed count or a scrap count, you can do that. Or maybe you want to set target outfeeds, right? All of this stuff you can edit through the system here. You can also do something like this to supplement data that maybe you can't get from anywhere. For example, we've seen people use the target outfeed especially to say like, hey, I just want to go in every day and say what my target outfeed is going to be for these different times. And so they could just go into the screen and add them in and call it good. Same thing for machine events. You can go and see all your machine events and you could see what the types and classifications are. You could edit them to change any information about them and all that fun stuff. And you can also change, you can also look at the schedule events that have happened for this machine, who else is using this schedule that this machine is using, and you can see what the actual schedule for this piece of equipment is and edit the schedule through here. So just a couple admin tools that you can have to be able to, fix any data that may go in wrong or anything like that. Or if you need to clarify something or change something later, then you have that kind of power. All right. I think that's really everything I wanted to cover for today on the OEE package. So.
Well, Eric, another question did come in.
Yeah.
Do you require a separate OPC server, or can you connect to a machine natively from within Spark?
Yeah, we can connect to the machine natively. We just use Ignition's tag layer. So that means we can use Ignition's OPC server, we can use a separate OPC server, but using Ignition's OPC server would be connecting directly. So could do any of that stuff that you want to do. A lot of flexibility there. It's a great part about Ignition's tag layer. Why we like using it.
So there's no other questions. If you do have questions, you need to get them in quickly. Otherwise, we're going to start to wrap up here in a moment. This is somebody that's knowledgeable of Flexware's products here. Will Spark SCADA and Lift integrate with this?
So we have not deployed Lift and Spark OEE together at this point. However, that is definitely something that we're hoping to do at some point. Spark SCADA and Spark OEE we have deployed multiple times together. Spark SCADA and Spark, really all the Spark packages have a lot of the similar backbone, being the production model, and so they deploy very nicely together. So yeah, definitely can do those two together.
Thanks for the product shout out there, Ron.
Yeah.
SparkMES, an MES accelerator for ignition.